10 years, 20 years, you know, the Inca explorers went to different places to build secret places, because that was the plan, that was the schedule of Pachacuti, the ninth Inca king, to build specific places, you know, because he knew, you know, someday was going to arrive here some strange people or their enemies. And that is the way they began to build on the north, Cuela. They began to build Choquequirao, so behind these mountains nearby Vilcabamba. They tried to find Vilcabamba also, and they found this corner in these mountains. And they said, the explorers who came here, they found here amazing raw materials. They said, rocks everywhere. Then just on top is the grassland to make the thatch roof. Then down below in the jungle, vines. But the only problem here was the no water. But the water was immediately, you know, let's say fixed here. They built 7 kilometers of stone aqueduct to bring the running water from behind of Machu Picchu mountain. 7 kilometers. Plus, they began to build on the other side terraces like this, huge area where they cultivated first the food. And then they began to build here the terraces, in order to make crops, because without crops, no food. That is the way they built first the terraces for the food production. Later on top of the terraces, look at those houses. They began to build rooms, palaces, houses, you know, in storages. Even the round building there is the Temple of the Sun. Do you see that? The Temple of the Sun. And then they left the big areas, open areas, to make the plazas. But simultaneously, those plazas were even cultivated at certain times of the year, because they were not going to waste 1 square meter of land without production. All these terraces, look at this here, I'm pointing here, and on top, hundreds of terraces. So the production of different crops was going to be excellent. Once they had enough food to eat, they brought more builders. So at the beginning, maybe they were only 100, then 200, then 300, 400, and then a lot of people come. Once they have at least 100 rooms, you know, in this area, the kids came here when they were 7, 8, 10 years old. And so those boys came here to live under the teaching of the psychologists, teachers, you know, and then those teachers gave them the amazing education for them. And later, Machu Picchu became the educational center, like a university for smart boys. Only the chosen boys, not for girls. I said yesterday, the girls were not going to live here, because all over Machu Picchu, 100% is not prepared for women. Okay? But I said the women arrived here in 1536 with Manco Inca, one of the last Inca persecuted by the Spaniards from Ollantaytambo. Okay? And the boys grew up here. At the beginning, maybe they were 50, 60, maybe 100. Finally, the whole population at around 1400 was 1,000 men. 1,000 men. And these men, you know, in those 120 years, maybe 150 years, were educated in many ways. Some of the some group of men were educated to be astronomers. Some others, politicians, leaders. Some others, priests. Some others, shamans, healers, curanderos. Some others, cook. Some others, builders, architects, engineers. Because, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, Machu Picchu, from here, from this panoramic view, is divided into several sectors for a specific kind of people. For instance, from here, I'll tell you, if you don't mind if I point it from here, right?
Si.
Look at that. For instance, look at this. This area where we are now, where we are in this area, there is, do you see the door there, the main door? From that point, from that wall to here, this was the farmers' area. The farmers, the agronomers, the acclimated, domesticated, a kind of prototype of seeds. They acclimate here, highland crops versus lower land crops, because Machu Picchu's elevation, so perfect elevation, no more than 8,000 feet. This is the perfect elevation to acclimate it, highland crops, potatoes, let's say, or corn, or lower land crops such as coca plantations, fruits, papayas, or let's say chirimoya, the fruits, or some other sweet potatoes. And so they acclimated. So the farmers were in charge about that job. Then, look at that, the round building, the Temple of the Sun, all that area where the sun is now hitting that area, that was the neighborhood of those leaders, politicians, and shamans, the priests were living there in that area. Maybe they were a group of 150, 160 men. So the truth is, in that area were living those priests, shamans, and the leaders, the ruling class. And then further down, do you see the pyramid? The pyramid, in that area were living the astronomers. The astronomers were a small group, maybe only 10 or 20, no more than 20. And then, however, the majority of the people, the architects, engineers, builders, were living from the big plaza with the place to the right. To the right, or I mean to the east. So all that area was the largest neighborhood for the architects, engineers, builders. How we know about that? Easy peasy. The archaeologists, in Bingham's time. Then after Bingham, we did even some excavations there in this last 60 years after Bingham. We found pottery, we found human skeletons, we found pieces of textiles, we found spindles, we found shovels, foot plow, hand plow, knives, including mirrors came here in the Spanish times. When the girls came from Ollantaytambo to here with Manco Inca in 1536, maybe those girls, of course, were the concubines of the Spaniards. Even that I said 20% of those girls who arrived with Manco Inca here were pregnant. They gave birth. They are Spanish kids here, maybe white skin, but of course they grew up here in an Inca society. These young babies never met their Spanish fathers after 1536. And so those girls who came in 1536, well, we suppose they got some mirrors from Europe, the Europeans brought and gave them. Okay, so they gave them, the Spanish men, they gave them presents, tweezers, mirrors, medals from Europe, even some sandals, things. All those items gave us the information. Thanks to the archaeologists and the archaeology profession told us the dates, even all the information, plus the human skeletons dated, even the disease box. The 5 diseases were investigated here, and so Bingham found only 3 diseases: yellow fever, malaria, and gonorrhea, and smallpox, and the other one later in this last 60 years. Well, because every time the skeletons of Machu Picchu at Peabody Museum in the United States are checked and checked it all the time with more techniques, more sophisticated, systems. And now, even in Cusco, at the universities in Cusco, the anthropologists are working, the forensics are working what was going on. And finally, I think at this point we finished the investigations of the skeletons at least in 90%. So they gave us the answer that diseases kill the population of Machu Picchu. They didn't abandon Machu Picchu, so they die here. So to finish this chapter of the history of Machu Picchu, this citadel of the Incas was like a university education, only for those smart boys. Okay, politicians, healers, shamans, astronomers, agronomers were educated here. But once the population died in 1500, at the beginning of 1600, all the citadel was completely buried by the jungle. And Machu Picchu was forgotten in the whole history. 1600, nobody knew about this place. 1800, nothing. But this is the beginning of the discovery of Machu Picchu, another chapter. In 1874, one German guy, Mr. Göring, was paid by the Peruvian government to make the first map along these valleys. Okay, Mr. Göring came along this valley, then he turned around as far as the jungles, and he mentioned in his map, Ollantaytambo town, Urubamba River, Machu Picchu mountain, Huayna Picchu mountain. Then, down below, some other small towns. But it doesn't mean he came to Machu Picchu. He never got to Machu Picchu because this was buried by the jungle. Then at the end of 1895, 96, one gentleman from England came, Sir Clement Markham. Mr. Markham again checked the map of Göring and he said, I'm going to go to explore down the valleys. He mentioned Machu Picchu mountain, he mentioned Huayna Picchu mountain, he mentioned Santa Teresa town, then Quillabamba, another town, and the name of the mountains. We have those maps. And so, even it means he never found the ruins. Okay, they were just hanging around below Machu Picchu. In 1902, 1901, there were farmers living around this way. So those farmers gave to Markham Göring, the directions, and even they gave the name of the mountains, but they didn't tell to those previous men the existence of the citadel. And in 1902, those farmers, Mr. Agustin Lizarraga, then another farmer was Mr. Arteaga Melchor, Gavino Sanchez, Peruvian men, mestizos. These guys were making land down below. One day in 1902, in the dry season, June, July, they cut the forest off, the jungle. And then they made a huge area ready to burn. In the middle of the dry season, they burned all the dead trees. All of the sudden, the fire jumped over the mountain of Machu Picchu. In minutes. Because in the dry season, all this vegetation underground is flammable and dry. And the fire devastated Huayna Picchu. The fire came down here. Then the fire climbed up the mountain of Machu Picchu, and it was devastated, we suppose, in 2, 3, 4 days. Burning the whole mountain. Those farmers didn't care about that. They didn't pay because they didn't know what was up here. And that was in July, those first days of July 1902. And then, after 5, 6 days, when the fire was killed by the little rain, those farmers said, okay, let's go to the top of the mountain. Maybe we'll find some arable land. Mr. Agustin Lizarraga, Mr. Melchor Arteaga, and one little boy, Pablo, 13 years old, Pablito. The three of them came up with their machetes, and because all the mountain was visible, all the rocks were visible, and so after 1 hour, 2 hours walking up here, they found a beautiful Inca trail getting down. They found the Inca trail that way. And then they climb up the steps. Oh, the Inca trail was perfectly done, still available and walkable. After some hours, believe me, they saw the ruins. They saw the ruins that year in 1902, that morning of July 14, 1902. Those farmers discovered the ruins. And so, then, when they saw all these ruins, they said, oh, wonderful place for agriculture. And then, some other days later, they began to see golden goblets. They saw treasures in Machu Picchu, human skeletons. But they were scary to see skeletons spread throughout the ruins. They respect the place. And now they began to make rituals, offerings to touch the place. They were keeping the secret for the next 9 years. Okay, when they went down back to the house, of course, they shared this good news with their wives. Doña Rosa, the wife of Agustin, Melchor, his wife, and maybe only the families knew about that. And however, in the meantime, there were many other explorers, 1911. In 1911, Mr. Hiram Bingham arrived to Cusco and Peru, of course, and he came specifically to look for Vilcabamba, the last stronghold of the Incas. Because in North America, Mr. Bingham was a professor at Yale University. And he came along this way. But there are details. In Ollantaytambo, in one of the restaurants, Mr. Bingham sat down for lunch, coffee, something. And then the owners of the restaurant offered to Bingham, sir, look at this nice artifact. And they showed to Mr. Bingham amazing golden goblet for $1. This because those people, they didn't know the value of those priceless artifacts. Mamma mia. And Bingham said, okay, I'm going to buy the two of them, but I'm not going to carry them because they are heavy, almost 5 kilograms each golden goblet. I'm not going to carry this heavy stuff, golden goblets. He paid some money. He said in his book, I bought 2 of them in Ollantaytambo. I left there thinking to pick them up on my way back. He did. And he saw the golden goblets. But those restaurant men told to him, there is one guy, his name is Agustin Lizarraga, down below, 4 days walking from here. He brought them. Do you remember Agustin Lizarraga, that guy who found Machu Picchu in 1902? They began to pick them up, and so they began to sell them in Ollantaytambo. And Bingham said, okay, I have to know that guy. I have to meet that guy. And so, 4 days later, Mr. Bingham arrived to Lizarraga's ranch that afternoon of July 23rd, 1911.